book on finance. It could be a book on personal finance, investing. Sometimes we even pick books on habit and mindset building, because we understand how it's so critical that as women who are building wealth, we must ensure that we are consistently working on our mindset. And also really, we can see the wealth getting created in our lives when we alter our habits and create new habits which ensure that we are spending our money in the right places. We are able to save much more. We are learning about investing and also investing in a systematic way. So all of these get developed through working on our habits every single day. So inside of that, we have been reading a lot of books, and we have been around for over 2.5 years now. And at Women on Wealth, what we have been doing is really taking charge of our finances. And for anybody who would like to become a part of the online money book club, and this is really a safe space for everyone, whether you have been reading books on finance, whether you read books at all or not, and if you want to develop the habit of reading books, or you want to get acquainted with the idea of exposing yourself to finance, this is a very, very good place, and we are all women who are committed to building wealth in our lives. So if you'd like to be a part of the book club, then the description of this video has a link for you to join our money book club. So looking forward to really have more women on board with us and read together. So I'm joined here by Alina, Meryl, Usha, Tanvi. Warm welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. And we've been reading this book titled The Psychology of Money. Reading together, discussing the book. That's what we've been doing. So we have reached we finished chapter 17, and we will be beginning to read from chapter 18 this evening. So hi, everyone. How was last week? We slowed down. We slowed down a little bit last week so everybody could catch up. We have some new readers in the club. So how was last week, and any insights that you drew from the book? Please do share. Let's begin from there. Anyone who would like to share from what you've been reading? And have you guys been reading this book?
So I finished reading the book last week itself, but I keep sort of going back to it, especially at a time like this when the markets are so volatile, and there's no way to know what the future holds, and it kind of reassures you that the market has withstood many crises, right? But I think until you actually invest and experience it for yourself, it seems very conceptual in nature. So it's been very interesting to correlate what he's talking about in the book with what is happening in the market right now, right from the narrative, and then the other thing is staying really calm and also questioning like what kind of wealth creation goals work for you or approach works for you, right? So it's been kind of more interesting because of that as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. And this your sharing, Meryl, reminds me of this chapter, on the price we pay, right? And how it's very interesting that he talks about how volatility, it is what we are paying now, right? We may have had I remember sharing in the community how I was ecstatic about reaching a certain return percentage, and suddenly now with what's been happening, the market just slipping, and the repercussions of what is happening in far off lands. Sometimes it's some, we talk about macroeconomic effects that we see these are stuff we read about, and now when we get to experience as investors, oh, now then we go like, oh, this is what they were talking about, so this is what it means, and the price we pay for being in the market, and how volatility is the price we pay. So that was very, very interesting for me to see that. And how he also mentions that it is never free. Sometimes we pay a fee, and sometimes we pay the cost also of not being an investor. So all of those things were very, very interesting and really nicely put in a very smart manner. So that's something that I found really, I enjoyed reading the chapter on nothing's free, everything has a price. Anybody else who's been doing some reading and any learning that you would like to share? Okay, looks like everybody is catching up. We can begin with reading this chapter on When You'll Believe Anything, chapter 18, and we'll read together, and you can make a note of whatever comes to your mind, and we will pause in a little while and then share our insights and our learning. Okay, so I will share the screen, and if anybody would like to, inviting someone from the community to read the book, I will share it on the screen. So anyone who would like to volunteer. Any takers? We have Sneha, Tanvi, Usha, Joanna. Anybody who'd like to read?
Oh, somebody else is volunteer. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Sneha, you would like to read? Thank you so much. So
am I audible? Okay.
Yes, you are. Thank you. Okay. 1 second. Let me move this one. Okay, you can begin. Thank you.
When You'll Believe Anything, appealing fictions and why stories are more powerful than statistics. Imagine an alien dispatched to Earth. His job is to keep tabs on our economy. He circles about New York City trying to size up the economy and how it changed between 2007 and 2009. On New Year's Eve, 2007, he hovers over Times Square. He sees tens of thousands of happy partygoers surrounded by bright lights, monstrous billboards, fireworks, and TV cameras. He comes back to Times Square on New Year's Eve, 2009. He sees tens of thousands of happy partygoers surrounded by bright lights, monstrous billboards, fireworks, and TV cameras. It looks about the same. He cannot see much difference. He sees roughly the same number of New Yorkers hustling around the city. Those people are surrounded by the same number of office buildings, which house the same number of desks with the same number of computers hooked up to the same number of internet connections. Outside the city, he sees the same number of factories and warehouses, connected by the same highways, carrying the same number of trucks. He gets a little closer to the ground and sees the same universities teaching the same topics and handing out the same degrees to the same number of people. He sees the same number of patents protecting the same groundbreaking ideas. He notices that technology has improved. Everyone in 2009 carries smartphones that didn't exist in 2007. Computers are now faster. Medicine is better. Cars get better gas mileage. Solar and fracking technology has advanced. Social media has grown exponentially. As he flies around the country, he sees the same. Around the globe, more of the same. The economy is in about the same shape, maybe even better, in 2009 as it was in 2007, he concludes. Then he looks at the numbers. He's shocked that US households are $16 trillion poorer in 2009 than they were in 2007. He's dumbfounded that 10 million more Americans are unemployed. He's in disbelief when he learns the stock market is worth half of what it was 2 years before. He can't believe that people's forecast of their economic potential has plunged. I don't get it, he says. I have seen the cities. I have looked at the factories. You guys have the same knowledge, the same tools, the same ideas. Nothing has changed. Why are you poorer? Why are you more pessimistic? There was one change the alien couldn't see between 2007 and 2009, the stories we told ourselves about the economy. In 2007, we told a story about the stability of housing prices, the prudence of bankers, and the ability of financial markets to accurately price risk. In 2009, we stopped believing that story. That's the only thing that changed, but it made all the difference in the world. Once the narrative that home prices will keep rising broke, mortgage defaults rose, then banks lost money, then they reduced lending to other businesses, which led to layoffs, which led to less spending, which led to more layoffs, and on and on. Other than clinging to a new narrative, we had an identical, if not greater, capacity for wealth and growth in 2009 as we did in 2007. Yet the economy suffered its worst hit in 80 years. Different from, say, Germany in 1945, whose manufacturing base had been obliterated, or Japan in the 2000s, whose working age population was shrinking. That's tangible economic damage. In 2009, we inflicted narrative damage on ourselves, and it was vicious. It's one of the most potent economic forces that exist. When we think about the growth of economies, businesses, investments, and careers, we tend to think about tangible things. How much stuff do we have and what we are capable of? But stories are by far the most powerful force in the economy. They are the fuel that can let the tangible parts of the economy work, or the brake that holds our capabilities back. At the personal level, there are two things to keep in mind about a story. Driven world when managing your money. The more you want something to be true, the more likely you are to believe a story that overestimates the odds of it being true. What was the happiest day of your life? The documentary How to Live Forever asked the innocent question to a centenarian who offered an amazing response. Armistice Day, she said, referring to the 1918 agreement that ended World War I. Why? The producer asked. Because we knew there would be no more wars ever again, she says. World War II began 21 years later, killing 75 million people. There are many things in life that we think are true because we desperately want them to be true. I call these things appealing fictions. They have a big impact on how we think about money, particularly investments and the economy. An appealing fiction happens when you're smart, you want to find solutions, but face a combination of limited control and high stakes. They are extremely powerful. They can make you believe just about anything. Take a short example. Ali Hajaji's son was sick. Elders in his Yemeni village proposed a folk remedy. Shoved the tip of a burning stick through his son's chest to drain the sickness from his body. After the procedure, Hajaji told the New York Times, "When you have no money and your son is sick, you'll believe anything." Medicine predates useful medicine by thousands of years. Before the scientific method and the discovery of germs, there was bloodletting starvation therapy, cutting holes in your body to let the evils out, and other treatments that did nothing but hasten your demise. It seems crazy, but if you desperately need a solution and a good one isn't known or readily available to you, the path of least resistance is towards Hajaji's reasoning, willing to believe anything, not just try anything, but believe it. Chronicling the Great Plague of London, Daniel Defoe wrote in 1722, "The people were more addicted to prophecies and astrological conjurations, dreams, and old wives' tales than they were before or since. Almanacs frightened them terribly. The posts of houses and corners of streets were plastered over with doctors' bills and papers of ignorant fellows, quacking and inviting the people to come to them for remedies, which was generally set off with such flourishes as these: infallible, preventable pills against the plague, never failing preservatives against the infections, sovereign cordials against the corruption of the air." The plague killed a quarter of Londoners in 18 months. You'll believe just about anything when the stakes are at that high. Now think about how the same set of limited information and high stakes impact our financial decisions. Why do people listen to TV investment commentary that has little track record of success? Partly because the stakes are so high in investing. Get a few stock picks right and you can become rich without much effort. If there's a 1% chance that someone's prediction will come true and it coming true will change your life, it's not crazy to pay attention just in case. And there are so many financial opinions that once you pick a strategy or side, you become invested in them both financially and mentally. If you want a certain stock to rise tenfold, that's your tribe. If you think a certain economic policy will spark hyperinflation, that's your side. These may be low probability bets. The problem is that viewers can't or don't calibrate low odds, like a 1% chance. Many default to a firm belief that what they want to be true is unequivocally true, but they are only doing that because the possibility of a huge outcome exists. Investing is one of the only fields that offers daily opportunities for extreme rewards. People believe in financial quackery in a way that never would for, say, weather quackery, because the rewards for correctly predicting what the stock market will do next week are in a different universe than the rewards for predicting whether it will be sunny or rainy next week. Consider that 85% of active mutual funds underperformed their benchmark over the 10 years ending 2018. That figure has been fairly stable for generations. You would think an industry with such poor performance would be a niche service and have a hard time staying in business. But there's almost $5 trillion is invested in these funds. Give someone the chance of investing alongside the next Warren Buffett and they will believe with such faith that millions of people will put their life savings behind it. Or take Bernie Madoff. In hindsight, his Ponzi scheme should have been obvious. He reported returns that never varied. They were audited by a relatively unknown accounting firm, and he refused to release much information how the returns were achieved. Yet Madoff raised billions of dollars from some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. He told a good story and people wanted to believe it. This is a big part of why room for error, flexibility, and financial independence, important themes discussed in previous chapters, are indispensable. The bigger the gap between what you want to be true and what you need to be true to have an acceptable outcome, the more you're protecting yourself from falling victim to an appealing financial fiction. When thinking about room for error in a forecast, it is tempting to think that potential outcomes range from you being just right enough to you being very, very right. But the biggest risk is that you want something to be true so badly that range of your forecast isn't even in the same ballpark as reality. In its last 2007 meeting, the Federal Reserve predicted what economic growth would be in 2008 and 2009. Already wary of a weakening economy, it was not optimistic. It predicted a range of potential growth, 1.6% growth on the low end, 2.8% on the high end. That was its margin of safety, its room for error. In reality, the economy contracted by more than 2%, meaning the Fed's low-end estimate was off by almost threefold. It's hard for a policymaker to predict an outright recession because a recession will make their careers complicated. So even worst-case projections rarely expect anything worse than just slowish growth. It's an appealing fiction and it's easy to believe because expecting anything worse is too painful to consider. Policymakers are easy targets for criticism, but all of us do this to some extent, and we do it in both directions. If you think a recession is coming and you cash out your stocks in anticipation, your view of the economy is suddenly going to be wrapped by what you want to happen. Every blip, every anecdote will look like a sign that doom has arrived. Maybe not because it has, but because you want it to. Incentives are a powerful motivator, and we should always remember how they influence our own financial goals and outlooks. It can't be overstated. There's no greater force in finance than room for error, and the higher the stakes, the wider it should be. Everyone has an incomplete view of the world, but we form a complete narrative to fill in the gaps. My daughter is about a year old as I write this. She's curious about everything and learns so fast. But sometimes I think about all the stuff she hasn't comprehend. She has no idea why her dad goes to work every morning. The concept of bills, budgets, careers, promotions, and saving for retirement are completely foreign to her. Imagine trying to explain the Federal Reserve, credit derivatives, or a NAFTA to her. Impossible. But her world isn't dark. She does not wander around in confusion. Even at a year old, she's written her own internal narrative of how everything works. Blankets keep you warm, mom struggles keep you safe, and dates taste good. Everything she comes across fits into one of the few dozen mental models she's learned. When I go to work, she doesn't stop in confusion, wondering what salary and bills are. She has a crystal clear explanation of the situation. Dad isn't playing with me, and I wanted him to play with me, so I'm sad. Even though she knows little, she doesn't realize it because she tells herself a coherent story about what's going on based on the little she does know. All of us, no matter our age, do the same thing. Just like my daughter, I don't know what I don't know. So I'm just as susceptible to explaining the world through the limited set of mental models I have at my disposal. Like her, I look for the most understandable causes in everything I come across. And like her, I'm wrong about a lot of them because I know a lot less about how the world works than I think I do. This is true for the most fact-based Uh, this is true for the most fact-based of subjects. Take history, it's just the recounting of stuff that already happened. It should be clear and objective. But as B.H. Lyndall Hart writes in the book, why don't we learn from history? History cannot be interpreted without the aid of imagination and intuition. The sheer quantity of evidence is so overwhelming that selection is inevitable. Where there is selection, there is art. Those who read history tend to look for what proves them right and confirms their personal opinions. They defend loyalties. They read with a purpose to affirm or to attack. They resist inconvenient truths since everyone wants to be on the side of the angels, just as we start wars to end all wars. Daniel Kahneman once told me about the stories people tell themselves to make sense of the past. He said, insight, the ability to explain the past, gives us the illusion that the world is understandable. It gives us the illusion that the world makes sense, even when it doesn't make sense. That's a big deal in producing mistakes in many fields. People, when confronted with something they don't understand, do not realize they don't understand it because they are able to come up with an explanation that makes sense based on their own unique perspective and experiences in the world. However limited those experiences are. We all want the complicated world we live in to make sense. So we tell ourselves stories to fill in the gaps of what are effectively blind spots. What these stories do to us financially can be both fascinating and terrifying. When I'm blind to parts of how the world works, I might completely misunderstand why the stock market is behaving like it is, in a way that gives me too much confidence in my ability to know what it might do next. Part of the reason forecasting the stock market and the economy is so hard is because you're the only person in the world who thinks the world operates the way you do. When you make decisions for reasons that I can't even comprehend, I might follow you blindly into a decision that's right for you and disastrous to me. This, as we saw in chapter 16, is how bubbles form. Coming to terms with how much you don't know means coming to terms with how much of what happens in the world is out of your control. And that can be hard to accept. Think about market forecasts. We are very, very bad at them. I once calculated that if you just assume that the market goes up every year by its historic average, your accuracy is better than if you follow the average annual forecast of the top 20 market strategies from large Wall Street banks. Our ability to predict recessions isn't much better. And since big events come out of nowhere, forecasts may do more harm than good, giving the illusion of predictability in a world where unforeseen events control most outcomes. Carl Richards writes, risk is what's left over when you think you have thought of everything. People know this. I have not met an investor who genuinely thinks market forecasts as a whole are accurate or useful. But there's still tremendous demand for forecasts in both the media and from financial advisors. Why? Psychologist Philip Tetlock once wrote, we need to believe we live in a predictable, controllable world. So we turn to authoritative sounding people who promise to satisfy that need. Satisfying that need is a great way to put it. Wanting to believe we are in control is an emotional itch that needs to be scratched, rather than an analytical problem to be calculated and solved. The illusion of control is more persuasive than the reality of uncertainty. So we cling to stories about outcomes being in our control. Part of this has to do with confusing fields of precision with fields of uncertainty. NASA's New Horizons spacecraft passed by Pluto 2 years ago. It was a 3 billion mile trip that took 9.5 years. According to NASA, the trip took about 1 minute less than predicted when the craft was launched in January 2006. Think about that. In an untested decade long journey, NASA's forecast was 99.9998% accurate. That's like forecasting a trip from New York to Boston and being accurate to within 4 millionths of a second. But astrophysics is a field of precision. It isn't impacted by the vagaries of human behavior and emotions like finances. Business economics and investing are fields of uncertainty, overwhelmingly driven by decisions that can't easily be explained with clean formulas, like a trip to Pluto can. But we desperately want it to be like a trip to Pluto because the idea of a NASA engineer being in 99.998% control of an outcome is beautiful and comforting. It's so comforting that we are tempted to tell ourselves stories about how much control we have in the other parts of our life, like money. Kahneman once laid out the part these stories take. When planning, we focus on what we want to do and can do, neglecting the plans and skills of others whose decisions might affect our outcomes. When planning, we focus on what we want to do and can do, neglecting the plans and skills of others whose decisions might affect our outcomes. Both in explaining the past and in predicting the future, we focus on the casual role of skill and neglect the role of luck. We focus on what we know and neglect what we do not know, which makes us overly confident in our beliefs. He described how this impacts businesses. I have had several occasions to ask founders and participants in innovative startups a question. To what extent will the outcome of your effort depend on what you do in your firm? This is evidently an easy question. The answer comes quickly and it has never been less than 80%. Even when they are sure and they are not sure they'll succeed, these bold people think their fate is almost entirely in their own hands. They are surely wrong. The outcome of a startup depends as much on the achievements of its competitors and on changes in the market as on its own efforts. However, entrepreneurs naturally focus on what they know best, their plans and actions, and the most immediate threats and opportunities, such as the availability of funding. They know less about their competitors and therefore find it natural to imagine a future in which the competition plays little part.
Just checking, should we pause here? Okay. Pausing. So we've done a whole lot of reading. Thank you so much, Sneha. Hi, Garima. Warm welcome. Hey. I'm just asking myself, what is the one takeaway from this chapter so far? It has left me speechless. What some of the things I've taken away from this is, how there are stories I may tell myself. There are so many blind spots. There are so many things I don't know, that I don't even know that I don't know.
So I was reminded when you read this line of when somebody comes and tells you something, the forecast part. I that suddenly realized that more or less our relationship managers from the bank are like that. They'll show you fancy graph that by this policy your money will go from here to Zoop crore in 5 year time, and we believe it. I at least believed it before I joined here. So anything good is so easy to be believed, and which is true.
And that story from the past is always shared because that's what
Hmm.
they know we would like to listen to, right? We would only like to know that it is going up, that there's predictability. Yeah.
And then I also like this line, risk is what's left over when you think you've thought of everything.
Yeah.
So I was asking, where is my enough? When do I stop? Because risk, it just goes on. But true.
Um, Also, it made me go to the many forecasts that we hear, just in the market, right? Okay, this is happening, so the outcome may be this. The stock might trade at this, or this is the range, right? We might get into another recession. So much predictions, and that because people like to hear that, right? But so much of that is also noise. And then again, so many people may be acting on those forecasts, right? People who are unaware. So Sneha's writing that one takeaway for her was that we cannot predict much. And that is not comforting, right, Sneha? To know that, oh, we cannot really predict much.
Yeah. I remember that 2008 time, it was such a difficult phase. I mean, people who were passing out and not getting jobs, layoffs. Yeah, we talked about that. But I think then after that, the economy, the next year itself, I mean, it slowly started picking up. Jobs were open. Yeah. So just have a positive outlook.
Yes, I remember that, and often I keep sharing this as well, something we learned from our stock investing mentor. She would always say that nobody knows the market. And she's somebody who has had over 35 years of experience in the market, right? And she'll always say this, nobody knows the market. Okay, I see that, Sneha, you were just one page away and I stopped you. We were one page away from finishing that chapter. So let's go ahead and complete it.
Sure.
Yeah.
From here, right?
Do you see it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. We all do this to some extent. And like my daughter, it doesn't bother us a bit. We don't wander around blind and confused. We have to think the world we operate in makes sense based on what we happen to know. It'd be too hard to get out of bed in the morning if you felt otherwise. But the alien circling over Earth, the one who's confident he knows what's happening based on what he sees, but turns out to be completely wrong because he can't know the stories going on inside everyone else's head. He's all of us.
Nice. And with that, we have finished chapter 18 and we are all together now. So the next chapter now. I trust that everybody else is also able to follow, and whatever thoughts you have, feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, inviting you to engage.
There was only one thing here which I wanted to bring up. There was one line which says, in 2009, we inflicted narrative damage on ourselves and it was vicious. It's one of the most potent economic forces that exists. But here I was just wondering, like, was it really only because of narrative damage? Like I think the US market was flooded with so many fraudulent products, right? That there was, and because of that, there was a lot of economic damage. So here I found that a little confusing, or I don't know if I fully agree with it. If any of you guys have any thoughts about that.
The paragraph which says that, go ahead. Somebody
No. Now that Meryl, you mentioned, So he's saying that whatever was reported or narrated in media, is he suggesting that that messaging caused
Yeah, I feel like that's what he's suggesting, but I don't agree. Like, I feel there was so much of damage, right, to the
from
actual economy.
2008 onwards, yeah, the entire
Like
housing
people,
and everything that
yeah, because
started.
they were all buying fraudulent products, right?
Mm.
Like it was that all those bonds and all were like it was highly unregulated, and that SEE and whatever, none of them did any real, regulation work, right? They sort of let it fall to the wayside.
Mm.
I felt like that was the only thing I disagree with in this. If what I feel is correct, if that's what.
Thank you for sharing, Meryl. I, for one, do not have any response or anything to add to what you said, but it's a thought I take away with me. Okay. So we will now read chapter 19 together, what we've learned about the psychology of your own money. So inviting someone to read who would like to read for the community.
I can read if nobody else is.
Sure, Garima, go ahead.
All together now, what we have learned about the psychology of your own money. Let's see. Congratulations, you are still reading. It's time to tie together a few things we have learned. This chapter is a bit of a summary, a few short and actionable lessons that can help you make better financial decisions. First, let me tell you a story about a dentist appointment gone horribly awry. It teaches us something vital about the dangers of giving advice about what to do with your money. Clarence Hughes went to the dentist in 1931. His mouth was radiating pain. His dentist put him under crude anesthesia to ease the pain. When Clarence woke hours later, he had 16 fewer teeth and his tonsils removed. And then everything went wrong. Clarence died a week later from his surgery's complications. His wife sued the dentist, but not because the surgery went or array. Every
Or
surgery risked death in 1931. Clarence, she said, never consented to the procedures in the first place and wouldn't if he were asked. The case wove through courts but went nowhere. Consent between doctor and patient wasn't black and white in 1931. One quote summed up the idea that doctors require freedom to make the best medical decisions. Without such, we could not enjoy the advancement of science. Unquote. For most of history, the ethos of medicine was that doctor's job was to fix the patient, and what the patient thought about the doctor's treatment plans wasn't relevant. Dr. J. Katz wrote about the philosophy in his book, The Silent World Between Doctor and Patient. Doctors felt that in order to accomplish that objective, they were obliged to attend to their patients' physical and emotional needs, and to do so on their own authority, without consulting with their patients about the decisions that needed to be made. The idea that patients may also be entitled to sharing the burdens of decisions with their doctors were never part of the ethos of medicine. This wasn't ego or malice, it was a belief in 2 points. Every patient wants to be cured. There is a universal and right way to cure them. Not requiring patient consent in treatment plans makes sense if you believe in these 2 points. But that's not how medicine works. In the last 50 years, medical schools subtly shifted teaching away from treating disease and towards treating patients. That meant laying out the options of treatment plans and then letting the patient decide the best path forward. This trend was particularly driven by patient protection laws, partly by Katz's influential book, which argued that patients have wildly different views about what's worth it in medicine. So their beliefs have to be taken into consideration. Katz wrote, It is dangerous nonsense to assert that in the practice of their art and science, physicians can rely on their benevolent intentions, their abilities to judge what is the right thing to do. It is not that easy. Medicine is a complex profession, and the interactions between physicians and patients are also complex. That last line is important. Medicine is a complex profession, and the interactions between physicians and patients are also complex. You know what profession is the same? Financial advice. I can't tell you what to do with your money because I don't know you. I don't know what you want. I don't know when you want it. I don't know why you want it. So I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. I don't want to treat you like a dentist treated Clarence Hughes. But doctors and dentists aren't useless, obviously. They have knowledge. They know the odds. They know what tends to work, even if patients come to different conclusions about what kind of treatment is right for them. Financial advisors are the same. There are universal truths about in money, even if people come to different conclusions about how they want to apply those truths to their own finances. With that caveat in place, let's look at a few short recommendations that can help you make better decisions with your money. Go out of your way to find humility when things are going right and forgiveness and compassion when they go wrong, because it is never as good or as bad as it looks. The world is big and complex. Luck and risk are both real and hard to identify. Do so when judging both yourself and others. Respect the power of luck and risk, and you will have a better chance of focusing on things that you can control actually. You'll also have a better chance of finding the right role model. Less ego, more wealth. Saving money is the gap between your ego and your income. And wealth is what you don't see. So, wealth is created by suppressing what you could buy today in order to have more stuff or more options in the future. No matter how much you earn, you will never build wealth unless you can put a lid on how much fun you can have with your money right now, today. Manage your money in a way that helps you sleep at night. That's different from saying you should aim to earn the highest return or save a specific percentage of your income. Some people won't sleep well unless they are earning the highest return. Others will only get a good rest if they are conservatively invested. To each their own. But the foundation of "does this help me sleep at night?" is the best universal guidepost for all financial decisions. If you want to do better as an investor, the single most powerful thing you can do is increase your time horizon. Time is the most powerful force in investing. It makes little things grow big and big mistakes fade away. It can't neutralize luck and risk, but it pushes results closer towards what people deserve. Become okay with a lot of things going wrong. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune because a small minority of things account for the majority of outcomes. No matter what you are doing with your money, you should be comfortable with a lot of stuff not working. That's just how the world is. So you should always measure how you have done by looking at your full portfolio rather than individual investments. It is fine to have a large chunk of poor investments and a few outstanding ones. That's usually the best case scenario. Judging how you have done by focusing on individual investment makes winners look more brilliant than they were, and losers appear more regrettable than they should. Use money to gain control over your time, because not having control of your time is such a powerful and universal drag of happiness. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, pays the highest dividend that exists in finance. Be nicer and less flashy. No one is impressed with your possessions as much as you are. You might think you want a fancy car or a nice watch. But what you probably want is respect and admiration. And you are more likely to gain those things through kindness and humility than horsepower and chrome. Save, just save. You don't need a specific reason to save. It's great to save for a car or a down payment or a medical emergency. But saving for things that are impossible to predict or define is one of the best reasons to save. Everyone's life is a continuous chain of surprises. Savings that aren't earmarked for anything in particular is a hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment. Define the cost of success and be ready to pay it. because nothing worthwhile is free. And remember that most financial costs don't have visible price tags. Uncertainty, doubt, and regret are common costs in the finance world. They are often worth paying, but you have to view them as fees, a price worth paying to get something nice in exchange, rather than fines, a penalty you should avoid. Worship room of error. A gap between what could happen in the future and what you need to happen in the future in order to do well is what gives you endurance. And endurance is what makes compounding magic over time. Room for error often looks like a conservative hedge, but if it keeps you in the game, it can pay for itself many times. Avoid the extreme ends of financial decisions. Everyone's goal and desires will change over time. And the more extreme your past decisions were, the more you may regret them as you evolve. You should like risk because it pays off over time, but you should be paranoid of ruinous risk because it prevents you from taking future risk that will pay off over time. Define the game you're playing and make sure your actions are not being influenced by people playing a different game. Respect the mess. Smart, informed, and reasonable people can disagree in finance because people have vastly different goals and desires. There is no single right answer, just the answer that works for you. Now, let me tell you what works for me. Should we continue or confessions? Okay. Sandy Gottesman, a billionaire investor who founded the consulting group First Manhattan, is said to ask one question when interviewing candidates for his investment team: what do you own and why? Not what stocks you think are cheap or what economy is about to have a recession. Just show me what you do with your money. I love this question because it highlights what can often be a mile wide gap between what makes sense, which is what people suggest you do, and what feels right to them, which is what they actually do. Half of all US mutual fund portfolio managers do not invest a cent of their own money in their funds, according to Morningstar. This might seem atrocious, but surely the statistics uncover some hypocrisy. But this kind of stuff is more common than you think. Ken Murray, a professor of medicine at USC, wrote in an essay in 2011 titled How Doctors Die that showed the degree to which doctors choose different end of life treatments for themselves than they recommend for their patients. Doctors don't die like the rest of us, he wrote. What's unusual about them is not how much treatment they get compared to most Americans, but how little. For all the time they spend fending off the deaths of others, they tend to be fairly serene when faced with death themselves. They know exactly what is going to happen. They know the choices, and they generally have access to any sort of medical care they could want. But they go gently. A doctor may throw the kitchen sink at her patient's cancer, but choose palliative care for herself. The difference between what someone suggests you do and what they do for themselves isn't always a bad thing. It just underscores that when dealing with complicated and emotional issues that affect you and your family, there is no right answer. There is no universal truth. There is only what works for you and your family. Checking the boxes you want checked in a way that leaves you comfortable and sleeping well at night. There are basic principles that must be adhered to. This is true in finance and in medicine. But important financial decisions are not made in spreadsheets or in textbooks. They're made at the dinner table. They often aren't made with the intention of maximizing returns, but minimizing the chance of disappointing a spouse or a child. Those kinds of things are difficult to summarize in charts and formulas, and they vary widely from person to person. What works for one person may not work for another. You have to find what works for you. Here is what works for me. How my family thinks about savings. Charlie Munger once said, I did not intend to get rich. I just wanted to get independent. We can leave aside rich and independent, but independence has always been my personal financial goal. Chasing the highest return or leveraging my assets to live the most luxurious life has little interest to me. Both look like games people do to impress their friends, and both have hidden risk. I mostly just want to wake up every day knowing my family and I can do whatever we want to do on our own terms. Every financial decision we make revolves around that goal. My parents lived their adult years in two stages: dirt poor and moderately well off. My father became a doctor when he was 40 and already had three kids. Earning a doctor's salary did not offset the frugal mentality that is forced when supporting three hungry kids while in medical school. And my parents spent the good years living well below their means with a high savings rate. This gave them a degree of independence. My father was an emergency room doctor, one of the highest stress professions I can imagine, and one that requires a painful toggling of circadian rhythms between night and day shifts. After 2 decades, he decided that he had had enough, so he stopped, just quit, moved on to the next phase of his life. That stuck with me. Being able to wake up one morning and change what you're doing on your own terms whenever you are ready seems like the grandmother of all financial goals. Independence to me doesn't mean you'll stop working. It means you only do the work you like with people you like at the time you want for as long as you want. And achieving some level of independence does not rely on earning a doctor's income. It's mostly a matter of keeping your expectations in check and living below your means. Independence at any income level is driven by your savings rate. And past a certain level of income, your savings rate is driven by your ability to keep your lifestyle expectations from running away. My wife and I met in college and moved in with each other years before we got married. After school, we both had entry level jobs with entry level pay and settled into a moderate lifestyle. All lifestyles exist on a spectrum, and what is decent to one person can feel like royalty and or poverty to another. But at our incomes, we got what we considered a decent apartment, a decent car, decent clothes, decent food, comfortable but nothing close to fancy. Despite more than a decade of rising incomes, myself in finance, my wife in healthcare, we have more or less stayed at that lifestyle ever since. That's pushed our saving rate continuously high. Virtually every dollar of raise has accrued to savings, our independence fund. We now live considerably below our means, which tells you little about our income and more about our decision to maintain a lifestyle that we established in our 20s. If there's a part of our household financial plan I'm proud of, it's that we got the goalpost of lifestyle desire to stop moving at a young age. Our savings rate is fairly high, but we rarely feel like we're repressively frugal because our aspirations for more stuff haven't moved much. It's not that our aspirations are non existent. We like nice stuff and live comfortably. We just got the goalpost to stop moving. This would not work for everyone, and it only works for us because we both agree to it equally. Neither of us are compromising for the other. Most of what we get pleasure from, going for walks, reading, podcast, cost little. So we rarely feel like we're missing out. On the rare occasion when I question our savings rate, I think of the independence my parents earned from years of saving, and I quickly come back. Independence is our top goal. A secondary benefit of maintaining a lifestyle below what you can afford is avoiding the psychological treadmill of keeping up with the Joneses. Comfortably living below what you can afford without much desire for more removes a tremendous amount of social pressure that many people in the modern first world subject themselves to. Nassim Taleb explained, true success is existing True success is exiting some rat race to modulate one's activities for peace of mind. I like that. We are so far committed to the independence camp that we have done things that make little sense on paper. We own our house without a mortgage, which is the worst financial decision we have ever made, but the best money decision we have ever made. Mortgage interest rates were absurdly low when we bought our house. Any rational advisor would recommend taking advantage of cheap money and investing extra savings in higher return assets like stocks. But our goal isn't to be coldly rational, but psychologically reasonable. The independent feeling I get from owning our house outright far exceeds the known financial gain I did get from leveraging our assets with a cheap mortgage. Eliminating the monthly payment feels like better than maximizing the long term value of our asset. It makes me feel independent. I don't try to defend this decision to those pointing out its flaws or those who would never do the same. On paper, it's defenseless, but it works for us. We like it, that's what matters. Good decisions aren't always rational. At some point, you have to choose between being happy or being right. We also keep a higher percentage of our assets in cash than most financial advisors would recommend. Something around 20% of our assets outside the value of our house. This is also close to indefensible on paper, and I am not recommending it to others. It's just what works for us. We do it because cash is the oxygen of independence, and more importantly, we never want to be forced to sell the stocks we own. We want the probability of facing a huge expense and needing to liquidate stocks to cover it to be as close to zero as possible. Perhaps we just have a lower risk tolerance than others. But everything I've learned about personal finance tells me that everyone, without exception, will eventually face a huge expense they did not expect. And they don't plan for these expenses specifically because they did not expect them. The few people who know the details of our finance ask, what are you saving for? A house, a boat, a new car? No, none of those. I'm saving for a world where curveballs are more common than we expect. Not being forced to sell stock to cover an expense also means we are increasing the odds of letting the stocks we own compound for the longest period of time. Charlie Munger put it well. The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. How my family thinks about investing. I started my career as a stock picker. At the time, we only owned individual stocks, mostly large companies like Berkshire Hathaway and Procter & Gamble. Mixed with smaller stocks, I consider deep value investments. Go back to my 20s, and at any given point, I held something like 25 individual stocks. I don't know how I did as a stock picker. Did I beat the market? I'm not sure. Like most who try, I didn't keep a good score. Either way, I've shifted my views, and now every stock we own is a low cost index fund. I don't have anything against actively picking stocks, either on your own or through giving your money to an active fund manager. I think some people can outperform the market averages. It's just very hard and harder than most people think.
Okay, I think I should pause here. Just checking. More. So I think we are ready to now pick a new book. We have a few more pages to go, but I think we'll pick a new book next week. Do check the library and see if you'd like to suggest a book, maybe something that we've not read. So feel free to do that. Okay. So for the rest of the week, we'll continue to read this book and finish off and recommendations.
You want to start a new book next Friday, Sheetal? Because it's not much left.
Yeah. I think we're ready. So we can start with the recommendations. So if you have, do check out the library, and if there's anything that interests you, maybe something we have not picked yet, and we can get the votes out.
Sure.
All right. But totally love the last pages that we read today all together now, and the confessions he's made. An independence fund sounds it's really inspiring. And to also to get the goalpost moving. Yeah.
I think that's most important, to decide on the goal and not with every increment. No need to add two things to your expenditure. Just rationalize.
Yeah. Lead a humble life. Yeah.
And also this thing, right, where he says, does this help me sleep at night? I think that is like something one has to keep on reminding ourselves of, right?
Yeah.
Is everything that we're doing allowing that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think these are values I relate to now as a person, may not have been the case many years back. I had very different ambitions.
I know. I think it's common to all of us. We've all had that fancy jacket or and
Not so much about that, but I think sometimes it's about choosing what kind of a job or what kind of a ambition. Like if you're going to build a startup, you need to have different kind of energy, different kind of
absolutely,
focus altogether, right?
Mm.
Good to find what you connect to, I think.
Yes. So thank you guys for joining
you.
this evening. We will continue to read and do share your recommendations. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you again. Thank
Sure.
you.
Bye,
Okay, guys.
everyone. Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.